Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be making the case for the Craftworld Eldar Combat Patrol and talking about why it's good in 10th edition. So this is a combat patrol that was kind of bad in 9th edition, and I basically told everybody and their mothers not to pick up this set if you were just starting out, because you could only really go one way with it in 9th edition, which was an Uthway list if you wanted to play a viable competitive list. And even then, there were units that just weren't that good, right? Guardians, for example, and the Wraithlord, while okay, weren't the best in 9th edition. I personally liked the Wraithlord in 9th edition and thought it was a little bit underrated, but the Guardians were far from good. And in fact, most of the time, they were considered one of the worst units in the entire codex. However, in 10th edition, all the units that are included in the Craftworld Eldar Combat Patrol are very effective. In fact, they're some of the best in the index. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into the video and talk about the Craftworld Eldar Combat Patrol and why it's a good buy for 10th edition. But first, quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in today's video. We're going to be taking a look at the contents and value of the Eldar Combat Patrol. We're going to be analyzing the units in the Combat Patrol and its effectiveness overall, and advice on how to build your Combat Patrol as well. So looking at the contents, it's just what's on the box. It includes 1 Farseer on foot, 1 Wraithlord, 6 Wind Riders, and 10 Guardians, which can be built as Storm Guardians or Defenders. So what is the value of this box set, right? Because you need to know the value of this set in order to make sure you're getting a good deal. So separately, they're actually quite expensive. And if you look at the prices individually, a Farseer, for example, in the United States costs $33.50, Wind Riders cost $120, a Wraithlord costs $60, and Storm Guardians or Guardians cost $60. That's insane for the US, right? If you bought them all separately. And it's a pretty similar price elsewhere, right? It's 19 British pounds for a Farseer, 70 British pounds for 2 units of Wind Riders, 90 euros for 2 boxes of Wind Riders. So, it's pretty up there. If you add all these separately, you end up getting a pretty high price. And that price is $273.50 United States dollars, $161.50 pounds, and 209 euros if bought separately. So that's pretty insane if you think about it. You're dropping easily a good portion of your paycheck. Regardless of how you look at it, it's a pretty high amount. Now, what is the cost of the Combat Patrol? Well, in the United States, it's $160 from GW, it's 95 pounds, and 125 euros. So that is an insane amount of savings. That's about a 60% savings wherever you look at it at, right? So in the US, it's about 58.5%. Great Britain, it's about 58.8%. And in Europe, it's 59.8%, which is an incredible amount of savings, right? And that's just from the GW prices. We're not even talking about third-party merchandisers or other places to buy it like Amazon or Noble Knight Games or anything like that, right? So any of those websites that you can save money on, this is not even including those savings as well. So buying the Combat Patrol is actually a very good way to get in the game for relatively cheap. I mean, these are, well over $200 worth of models in the US, and you're going to be saving about 58% or about around 60% if you buy the Combat Patrol. And you will need these units, right? These units are pretty effective. You're going to eventually want to add these to your collection anyway, considering their rules for 10th edition are pretty good. All right, so having said that and talked a little bit about the value of the Combat Patrol, let's go and analyze the units in the Combat Patrol and its effectiveness overall on the tabletop. So the Farseer that comes with it is one of the best models currently in the Eldar Index. It's in pretty much every single competitive list, and it's an S tier unit. So it can change a fate dice when used within 12 inches to a 6, which is massive with high value weapons like D cannons and bright lances, of which are also included in the Combat Patrol. Not the D cannons, but of course the bright lances. The Farseer can also cast Fortune on friendly units within 12 inches. And this basically makes them -1 to wound against enemy units. This is great on Wraith units, but also not bad on Guardians. So you do have a Wraithlord in the Combat Patrol, you can cast Fortune on him, and yes, it makes him very tough. You can also cast it on Guardians as well, just to make them a little bit tougher against indirect fire or anti-infantry shooting. which, believe it or not, does make a difference and makes them a lot more survivable, especially if they're in cover. Lastly, the Farseer has solid psychic shooting with Eldritch Storm. So it's strength 6, AP -2, and damage D3, and it also has blast, so it's good at taking out enemy infantry. And that's not bad if you think about the Farseer's cost, which is fairly cheap. Okay, so moving on to the Guardian Defenders and Storm Guardians, and they are a B tier unit. They're actually much better than they were last edition. Last edition, they were easily a C tier unit, and the Storm Guardians were a D tier unit, so they're much improved. So Guardian Defenders are good at camping objectives in your deployment zone and generating extra fate dice for you. The Bright Lance platform is solid as well. It synergizes very well with the Farseer, and the Farseer can also join them, of course. Storm Guardians are also an effective option at making your objectives sticky. It means you control them even if you move off the objective. And they have decent special weapons and durability as well. They have the Serpent Scale Shield, which gives them a 5+ invulnerable save, and they can take 2 Flamers and 2 Fusion Guns. Fusion Guns are good against heavier infantry and lighter vehicles and monsters, and the Flamers are good against infantry. So even though most people, kind of go for the Defenders, and I probably would too. I'm just more of a fan of Defenders. I'm not really a fan of Storm Guardians. Storm Guardians are still a viable pick for this Combat Patrol. If you like Storm Guardians, definitely build them because they are still a decent unit in 10th edition. Wind Riders also come in the box, and not only do you get 3, but you get 6 of them. And Wind Riders are an A tier unit. They're very fast and hard hitting. They reroll once to hit or all hits against targets in range of an objective. So if you have enemy infantry on an objective, Wind Riders will get a significant damage boost against that unit. They can take scatter lasers, which are effective against light infantry, and shuriken cannons, which are effective against heavier infantry. And lastly, if you do want to, you can take the shuriken catapults that can advance and shoot, which is better at objectives. Now, I do warn a lot of players now, the shuriken catapults are probably something that's not going to scale well into bigger point games, because you're going to have other units available to you that are just better at scoring objectives for less points. So do keep that in mind when building these. And the last unit in the Combat Patrol is the mighty Wraithlord, coming in at A tier. The Wraithlord is a very tough model, a toughness 11 and a 2+ save. It can take 2 Flamers or shuriken catapults. You're always going to want to take the Flamers though, pretty much, because they're auto hits. And they also have, ignores cover, which is good. It can also take 2 Eldar heavy weapons, which can be a mix of Bright Lance, Eldar Missile Launcher, Star Cannon, Shuriken Cannon, or Scatter Laser. You're most likely going to want to take Bright Lances or Missile Launchers, though, just because those are the highest value weapons in the lineup. And also because Wraithlords generate a fate dice for each unit it kills. So 2 Bright Lances could easily take down big stuff, and that's what you want this guy to do, basically, is take down your opponent's biggest threats. So how then effective is the Eldar Combat Patrol, right? Because we know these units are good on their own, but how good are they when used together? And I have to say they're very effective. And I think this is something that GW didn't intend, but actually worked out for the best in 10th edition. So the Wraithlord hits extremely hard against large targets with the Bright Lances or in combat, which the Farseer can boost further. Remember, the Farseer can change a fate dice to a 6. And if you give the Wraithlord Bright Lances between Unparalleled Mastery and the 6 to your fate dice, which you can use for the damage roll, you can take out some pretty heavy targets. You can also cast Fortune on the Wraithlord and make him even tougher so that, enemies can't root him off of objectives easily. The Wind Riders are fast enough to score on secondary objectives while dealing solid anti-infantry damage with shuriken cannons or scatter lasers. Again, you probably don't want to go with the shuriken catapults, just because with the shuriken catapults, they have less value than other units that can perform secondary objectives for less points, essentially. So you want to make sure your Wind Riders are built for damage, either with shuriken cannons or scatter lasers. And lastly, the Guardians of both variants are good at securing primary objectives in your backfield. Both the Storm Guardians and Guardian Defenders can do this well, and you really just have to kind of decide from there, what do you want? Do you want sticky objectives, or do you want to generate fate dice when you are controlling objectives? And the thing I really like about this Combat Patrol is everything synergizes so well together. There's so much synergy in this list, right? You give the Guardians a platform of a Bright Lance, the Farseer can change the Bright Lance to a 6 on damage, doing extreme damage. It can cast Fortune on either the Guardians to make them tougher against anti-infantry fire, or the Wraithlord to make it tougher against anti-monster. The Wraithlord protects the Guardians, make sure that nothing can get into combat with them easily. which is one of the weaknesses of Guardians of both variants. They're actually not that good in combat. Even the Storm Guardians are just not good in close combat. The Wind Riders are also your fast element of the list. They give you a little bit of punch on objectives. They can basically score on secondaries and stuff like that, and they give you a lot of utility overall. So the Combat Patrol really works well together and has a lot of synergy, which is not something we saw in 9th edition. In 9th edition, we saw very little synergy come out of this box set, except if you were playing an Uthway list, which a lot of people getting into Eldar aren't really into that. They're more into the Aspect Warriors and stuff like that. So having a box set like this with no Aspect Warriors was kind of a shame. However, in 10th edition, I have to say, these models are looking great. And it's really a great time to start Eldar. I know they're going to be nerfed in September and stuff like that, but the good news is the Combat Patrol probably won't be nerfed that much. I doubt they're going to change the Wraithlord or the Guardians or the Wind Riders, because those aren't units that are being taken, in really highly competitive lists too often. So I think those units are pretty safe for the most part. All right, so I do want to give you some advice on how to build your Combat Patrol, though, because some players will build the Combat Patrol in the way that the box tells them to build it, and I would suggest that you do not. So unless you want to exclusively play the GW Combat Patrol games or magnetize your models' weapons, do not, and I repeat, do not build them as they are represented on the box. The Combat Patrol loadouts and how they're represented on the box are super suboptimal, and they're close to being trash, to be honest, right? When expanding your army or outside of official Combat Patrol games. So you don't want to build them that way. And I can't stress this enough. When I was looking through the Combat Patrol loadouts, I was just thinking to myself, well, I know they had to balance it with the other Combat Patrols, but my God, they really crippled the Craftworld Eldar. And I just think it's because of the fact that GW realized that the Eldar Combat Patrol, when built correctly, was going to be way too strong for any other Combat Patrol to really effectively deal with, considering the special rules that the Eldar have. So if you look at the loadouts of the Combat Patrol, the Guardians, for example, have a Star Cannon, which is not at all optimal. The Wraithlord only has a single Bright Lance, and I believe it has Shuriken Catapults, which, again, not optimal, right? You want 2 weapons on there, you want 2 Bright Lances or 2 missile launchers, and you want 2 Flamers. And with the Wind Riders, 4 of them have Shuriken Catapults, and 2 of them have Scatter Lasers, which, again, very suboptimal way to build them. You either want to build them with all Scatter Lasers or all Shuriken Cannons. You don't want to put Shuriken Catapults in there unless you were just using them for a scoring unit. And even then, in bigger point games, there's going to be better options available to you. So you really don't want to arm them with that. So unless you're magnetizing your models, which is totally cool, if you magnetize your models, build them however you want, right? But if you're not magnetizing them, you're wasting your money building them the way the Combat Patrol box represents them. So please, for the love of God, if you are getting into Eldar and you're just starting out, do not build them that way. You can magnetize them, or you can just proxy them in Combat Patrol games, right? You could just say it's a Star Cannon when it's really a Bright Lance, right? It's not that competitive. It's not that big of a deal. But for the sake of the future of your army, do not build them like the Combat Patrol box tells you to build them. Okay, so what should I equip them with then? And many of you may be asking right now, well, okay, you said you don't want to build them the way the Combat Patrol states to build them, so how should I build them? Well, give the Wraithlord 2 Flamers and a Ghostglaive, and either 2 Bright Lances or 2 Missile Launchers. I prefer the Bright Lances, but in some of my lists, I do switch them out for Missile Launchers so that I can have some anti-infantry coverage on my Wraithlords as well. And actually, they're pretty good with the Missile Launchers because they're blast. And if you're dealing with a Horde army, that's a good way to clear out a lot of infantry. Give the Wind Riders Shuriken Cannons or Scatter Lasers. I prefer the Shuriken Cannons, but both are effective, and you can easily make the case for Scatter Lasers because they have a longer range and you can fire from a more safe distance. Arm the Guardian Defenders with a Bright Lance, or the Storm Guardians with 2 Flamers, 2 Power Swords, and 2 Fusion Guns, plus the Serpent platform. So you want to make sure these guys are fully loaded. The Guardian Defenders with the Bright Lance platform is by far the best. Again, occasionally, sometimes you might want a Missile Launcher platform, but most of the time you're going to want the Bright Lance platform. And the Storm Guardians do need the Flamers and the Fusion Guns and the Power Swords to be an effective unit. So definitely equip them with all that. Don't just, leave the Flamers, the Fusion Guns out. Okay, so for those of you interested now in maybe starting Eldar or picking up the Eldar Combat Patrol, where can you find it? So you can usually find it even cheaper than GW prices on eBay, Amazon, Element Games, or Noble Knight Games. All of those are going to be cheaper than the price that GW charges you. I bought mine 4 months ago on Amazon for around $115 in the United States before 10th edition came out. And, it wasn't a good buy back then, but I wanted to just purchase it anyway because I found it for a good price. I mean, $115 versus $160 is pretty good value, especially since buying them separately is very expensive, right? And I'm glad I did, considering how good the set is now. And you can probably still get it for around that price if you live in the US as well. So I know the prices are different depending on where you live, but in the United States currently, if you go to Amazon, you'll find a Combat Patrol for around $115. And what do you know? I looked the other day and found this Eldar Combat Patrol for $112. Again, prices may vary, obviously, by region as well as by date. So you do have to make sure you keep that in mind. However, there is a way you can support the channel and save some money from buying on Amazon through my affiliate link. So if you live in the US or Amazon is cheap where you live, I'm currently participating in Amazon's quote-unquote influencer program in an effort to hopefully save the Eldar community some money, and at the same time, give some of you an avenue to support the channel if you want to. Again, prices may differ by region, so do keep that in mind. And lastly, I will leave the link in the description for you to find. All right, so in conclusion, the Eldar Combat Patrol has insane value for the models you get, saving you around 60% if you had bought them separately instead. On top of this, the Combat Patrol is actually extremely effective on the tabletop and comes with a very powerful array of unit options that also scale well into larger games. Again, these are models you'll probably use all the way up to 2,000 points, which is awesome, right? The Wraith Lord is still good at 2,000 points, Wind Riders are still good at 2,000 points, and Guardians are certainly still good at 2,000 points. And the Farseer is just one of the best support characters in the entire game at the moment. So that's also a great thing. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months. Your help has been greatly appreciated in making the channel better. If you do want to join and support the channel, I do have free trials set up if you want to kind of check it out first. And those free trials get you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players who like to talk about strategies, tactics, and of course, hobbying with their fellow Eldar players. And I will leave the link for that in the description as well. Lastly, I do have a channel store page if you want to rep some Eldar-inspired apparel at your local game store. Check out the link in the description for that also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. See you guys next time. Have some great games this weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.